George Friedrich Handel is one of the two most prominent composers from the Baroque period. He was born in 1685 and he passed away in 1759. I want to give you a quick overview of his timeline, and then we'll talk about another important form that emerges from the Baroque period, the Oratorio. George Friedrich Handel was born in 1685 in the city of Halle, Germany. And he was born to parents. His father was a lawyer, and he was expected as the eldest child to take over the family practice. So Handel knew at an early age that he was going to be studying law eventually. But he had a lot of musical talents, and he played the violin, he played the oboe, and he also played the organ. The organ was his instrument of choice. He was so proficient as an organist that by the age of 12, he was appointed the assistant organist for the city of Halle. And so he was going to begin his composing career at this time. Again, who knows better than yourself what you're capable of doing on a given instrument. So his organ compositions start early on in his teenage years. He does go off to law school in 1701, but it's a miserable existence for him. That's not where his heart is. And here we have parents that let their child off the hook because they can see just how miserable he is, and they want to help him out. So the next year, he enters the University of Hamburg, and he studies music, and he begins his formal training. Now, I'm not slighting the University of Hamburg's music department whatsoever at all. But while Handel was there in Hamburg, he became associated with the local opera house. And this was probably his best education because he was able to hear and see firsthand what was the German taste for opera. Handel was very interested in learning all he could about this particular medium. It was the most important form from the Baroque period and the best way to make a lot of money. Handel was a very greedy individual. It was always focused on his economic success. So there in Hamburg, he became an oboist for a couple of years, and then he became the assistant director, assistant conductor, which meant he played the harpsichord within the orchestra. And so he knew which operas were a great success and which ones weren't. After finishing his degree, he was able to go to Italy for 3 years, and he studied with two great composers, Alessandro Scarlatti, who I referenced in the previous lecture. Scarlatti was a great Italian opera composer, so he was very adept at writing for the voice in the Baroque Italian style. And then he also studied with Arcangelo Corelli, who was probably the best virtuosic violinist from the Baroque period. And so from the two, he was able to put together his Italian taste, the Italian style of orchestral accompaniment, and of course for the vocal writings from Scarlatti. So this was his graduate studies, if you will. He then returned home to Germany, and he received an invitation to do a fortnight worth of recitals, organ recitals in London. And so he took the job and he moved to London, did the recitals. They were a huge success. He loved the people and they loved him. So Handel decided that he was going to take up residence in London and see what he could achieve there in England. Shortly after he arrived, people became very comfortable with this individual and very comfortable with his talents, and they offered him a position at the Royal Academy of Music. The Royal Academy of Music is still in business today, and a lot of that is due in part to Handel. At this particular time, the Royal Academy was nearly in financial ruin, and so with this hotshot new performer, musician that had arrived in London, they thought that this was the perfect individual to help right the ship and bring them into the red, so to speak. So Handel was brought on as the Impresario. We might refer to that today as the president of the college or of the university. He had many hats to wear, though. He was the professor for the organ students. He had to make sure that all the faculty were doing their jobs properly. He had to make sure that there were plenty of students enrolled at the academy. But the best thing for Handel was that he was the composer in residence. Usually, as a composer, you create your composition and then you hand it over to an opera house or a symphony hall or whatever. And there are other people that put their take on your composition. So when it's finally presented, might not exactly sound and look as you had originally intended. But being at the Royal Academy, that gave Handel a wonderful platform. He could compose his piece, he could hire his singers, his instrumentalists, and tell the artistic directors exactly what he wanted. So he could follow his baby all the way to the stage and see it as his original vision. And so this allowed Handel a wonderful opportunity to become known as a great opera composer. On your study guide, find Julius Caesar and Xerxes. It begins with an X, or Circe is the English translation. Those are the two operas by Handel that are on the list. And he went on to compose a great number of others throughout his days in London. Probably the best Baroque opera composer. Well, things start to change though. At the end of the 1730s and the beginning of the 1740s, there's a different direction that the Western European society is experiencing, and that's called the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment is going to affect music a great deal and usher in the next period, the classic period. But because of when Handel was born and when he was working and living, he is having to deal with this change in the air. And so a few of his final operas did not have the same huge success that he had had with all of his others. And so this really stressed Handel out to the point in 1741, which is a very pivotal year in Handel's life, Handel suffered a stroke that left him partially paralyzed for a time. His doctors, his physicians told him to get out of London and go and rest, go recuperate, go de-stress, and not worry about music for a while. So while he was outside of London resting, his librettist, the person who had been working with him on his previous few operas by helping him put together the text, sent him a different text. It was not another take on a Greek mythological legend. It was not another historical event from London's past or England's past. But yet this was a text that was a microcosmic view of the whole of the Bible, where it talks about the prophecy of a coming Christ child, the birth of that Christ child, his teaching, the crucifixion, the resurrection, and then the spread of the gospel. So Handel read through this and thought, maybe that's exactly what the London people want. Maybe they would rather hear something morally uplifting now. But there's a problem. Some of the earliest operas were biblically based, and people did not like seeing these portrayed by everyday people. So Handel knew if he was going to set this to music, he didn't need the actors. He didn't need the sets and the props. He just needed the singers and the music. So he was going to create now a new form called Oratorio. And these oratorios were going to be presented in concert format, where all the musicians are on stage all of the time. The choir's up on risers in the back, the orchestra's on the floor in front of them, the conductor in front of the orchestra, and to either side, the vocal soloist. If you're a vocal soloist and you only sing 3 times during the 2.5 hour long production, didn't matter. You were on stage all the time. Everybody's dressed in formal attire or in robes or something of that nature. So Handel then started to heal and get better. He set all of that text to music that he received from his librettist in a matter of 21 days, 3 weeks' time. That today is known as Handels Messiah, probably his best known oratorio. So in his memoirs later on, Handel talked about how Messiah healed him, brought him back to speed. So it's a tremendous composition. It looks and sounds just like an opera. So all of those years of practice of creating operas, it's not thrown to the side. It's just a difference in how it's going to be presented. So I would like for you to find in this PowerPoint a slide that says opera versus oratorio, and take a look at that. Opera, we now know, is a fully staged, fully memorized feast for the senses. It's totally memorized, and it's a secular entertainment. It contains overture, recitatives, arias, small ensembles, chorus. Well, now we switch to oratorio with Handel in 1741. This is now a sacred entertainment. It's going to be presented in opera houses, and it's going to be presented in the churches. But we're taking away all the theatrics. So it's performed in concert format. It's probably rehearsed just as much as the opera, but we say that it's not memorized because the singers can hold their music in front of them. And it contains all of the same musical numbers as the opera does. Starts off with an overture, has the recitatives and arias and the chorus and ensembles. It's going to use more chorus. If I were to be able to show you a score of Handel's Julius Caesar and a score of his Messiah and have you flip through both of them, hopefully you would recognize two changes. The oratorio is not in Italian. It's in English. So the language barrier with the language of music is taken away since this is no longer an opera. And the use of chorus is much, much more than it was in the opera. The textbook definition of an oratorio is that it's taking stories from the Old Testament. So stories about Adam and Eve, or Noah and the Ark, or Samson and Delilah, stories that you would have learned in Sunday school or Vacation Bible School or something like that, are fair game. A special type of oratorio is called a passion. If it's a passion, it says the name Passion in the title, then it's based off of the life of Christ. So it's taking a look at stories or maybe a whole gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. Now, Messiah, though, has text from the Old Testament. It has text from the Gospels. And then it has text all the way to Revelations. So it's the most atypical oratorio of them all. It doesn't fit the mold of oratorio or passion definition. Maybe this is the reason why it's the most popular today. But I wanted you to be aware that the oratorio and opera are very, very similar. It's in the way that they are presented, in the language difference, because a composer is going to write an oratorio for their audience. Handel lived in London, so he was writing it in English. Messiah has 3 acts, and to kind of help change things, instead of them being called acts, it's called parts. Part the first is the Christmas section, stories about the prophecy and the actual birth. Part the second is the Easter story. And then part the third, there's not a holiday to go along with it, or at least not one yet. It's called the spread of his doctrine, or the spread of Christ's doctrine. And throughout it, there's moments of word painting. Messiah finally debuted in the next year. He wrote it in 1741, but he first performed it in Dublin in 1742 at a music festival. And from that point forward, it has always been a really big hit. Messiah was performed by Handel a great deal after Handel's death in order to make it current with the current orchestra and the current stream of thought in music. Mozart actually did a new edition of it in the 1800s. An English composer and arranger, Sir Thomas Beecham, did an arrangement of Messiah. And Messiah is actually very connected to Georgia and to Atlanta. Dr. Robert Shaw, who is the head choral director for the Atlanta Symphony Chorus for so many years, did his own edition of Messiah, and it's a very popular edition today that's kind of somewhere in between the original Handel and the Mozart version of it. So it's something that has never left the repertoire. Even contemporary audiences have heard some of Messiah. The contemporary Christian world has done the Young Messiah, the New Young Messiah. The R&B artists back in the 90s did the Soulful Messiah, and so a lot of people say Handel's probably rolling in his grave because his music has been changed and altered so much. But I think because of his greedy and nature that he's very glad that his music is still reaching audiences in a contemporary way. What I would like for you to listen to from Messiah are the following three pieces. I want you to listen to the overture, which is a French overture. So listen for the bum, ba-bum, ba-bum, the dotted rhythm that in the beginning section, the slow section, and then in the fast section it will go into a fugue. The overture, again, because of Handel's writings, we know that Handel believed that the overture was the representation in his mind of a world without the, excuse me, in a world without the promise of a Messiah. So it's in a dark minor key. So that gives you a little bit of foreshadowing, a little bit of word painting concept. You have the soprano aria from the Christmas section called Rejoice Greatly, O Daughter of Zion. She sings the word shout a lot. Listen for the way shout is treated in the A section and in the return to the A section at the end. This is in ternary form. Shout is your moment of word painting for it. And then the other one is the triumphant Hallelujah chorus, which is the number that ends part the second, the Easter section. It's the number that celebrates the resurrection. These three are the ones that I would like for you to listen to. Again, the French overture that begins Messiah, Rejoice Greatly, O Daughter of Zion, the soprano aria from part the first, the Christmas section, and then the Hallelujah chorus that comes from part the second, the Easter storyline. So this completes Handel and the Oratorio. Handel is our official father of the Oratorio. When next we meet, we'll talk about Johann Sebastian Bach and the cantata.